Hi everyone, welcome to my channel. Before we dive into tonight's creepy story, don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss a scare. Now, let's get started. It was one of those sticky August nights when the air felt thick and damp, the kind that makes the crickets sing louder and the fireflies glow just a little dimmer. Claire and I had spent the evening drinking whiskey with our neighbors, Martin and his wife, Ellen. They lived down the road a bit, the closest thing we had to company in the middle of all this Iowa farmland. Our place was nothing fancy, a humble house on a stretch of land where we grew corn, but it was home. It was quiet. And it was supposed to be safe. The night had been fun, just the four of us laughing and sipping bourbon out on the porch as the sun dipped beneath the horizon. By the time the moon hung high and full in the sky, casting long shadows over the cornfields, Martin and Ellen had left, leaving us to settle in for the night. It was just after midnight when Claire and I crashed on the living room sofa, too tired and tipsy to bother heading upstairs. The soft patter of rain against the windows was oddly soothing. It had started just after our friends left, nothing more than a drizzle, really. Just enough to cool the air a little. I was drifting off, my head sinking into the worn cushion beneath me when a sound cut through the rain. A knock. Not the gentle kind, but a firm, deliberate knock on the front door. I sat up, heart thumping in my chest. Claire groaned beside me, still half asleep, and I glanced over at her. "Did you hear that?" I whispered. "Ma'am," she muttered, rubbing her eyes. "Who would be knocking this late?" "That's what I'd like to know," I said, pulling myself off the couch. My body felt heavy from the whiskey, but there was something about the knock, something that didn't sit right. We didn't get visitors this late, not out here. I grabbed my phone from the coffee table, more out of habit than anything else, and made my way to the door. "Who is it?" I called out, my voice sounding steadier than I felt. There was a pause, just long enough to make the hairs on the back of my neck prickle, and then a voice replied, a voice that sounded off, too high, like someone trying too hard to be friendly. "We're lost," the voice said. "Could you help us?" "My wife and our car broke down." I didn't open the door. I didn't even reach for the lock. Instead, I stood there, staring at the wood panel in front of me, trying to make sense of the situation. The voice had come from a man, or at least, it was supposed to be a man, but there was something off. Something unnatural. And the way he said, "my wife," I couldn't hear her. No shuffling feet, no quiet murmur beside him. Just him. "Where's your car?" I asked, still not moving. "Just up the road," he said, after another pause that seemed too long. "We've been walking for a while. Could we just use your phone? Please?" I glanced over my shoulder at Claire. She was sitting up now, her eyes wide, alert. She hadn't said a word, but I could tell she felt it too, something wasn't right. "I'm sorry, but I can't open the door," I called back, trying to keep my voice calm. "Why don't you head to the gas station down the highway? It's not too far from here." There was a moment of silence. Too long. And then the man's voice came again, but this time it was sharper, more insistent. "Please, we just need to make a call. My wife, she's hurt." That's when it hit me. He'd said he was with his wife, but I hadn't heard a thing from her. No footsteps, no voice, nothing. And his tone, it wasn't worried. It was rehearsed. I turned back to the door, my hand tightening on the knob. "What's your wife's name?" I asked, trying to keep the conversation going while I figured out what to do. "Is she okay?" The pause that followed was longer than all the others. "Catherine," he said finally, the words slipping out like he just pulled it from the air. She's bleeding. Please, man, open the door." Claire stood up now, her face pale in the dim light of the living room. "It doesn't sound right," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Something's wrong." I nodded. Something was very wrong. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found Martin's number. If this was some kind of prank, he'd know. Maybe it was just a joke gone wrong, but I wasn't taking any chances. "Martin," I whispered into the phone when he picked up. Are you out in front of my house? He sounded confused, groggy. What? No, man. I'm at home. Why? Someone's outside, pretending to be you, I think. They're saying they're lost, but something's off. Martin's voice sharpened. Lock the doors. I'll be there in 5 minutes. I hung up, my pulse racing. The knocking had started again, harder this time, like whoever was outside was losing patience. Just open the door, the man demanded. His voice had dropped the pretense of politeness. It was cold now, almost angry. We're not going to hurt you. Just let us in. I glanced at Claire, who was now clutching a throw pillow to her chest like it could somehow protect her. We need to call the cops, she whispered. I nodded, dialing 911. The operator picked up quickly, and I explained the situation as best I could, trying to keep my voice steady. Someone's trying to get into our house, I said. They're pretending to be lost, but something's not right. They've been knocking for a while now. Stay on the line, the operator said. Officers are on their way. Just as I hung up, I heard something that made my blood run cold, footsteps. But not at the door. They were moving around the side of the house. I grabbed Claire's hand, pulling her towards the back of the living room where we could keep an eye on the windows. Whoever was outside wasn't just knocking anymore. They were circling the house, testing the windows, trying to find another way in. Get away from the window! Claire hissed, her voice tight with fear. I grabbed the nearest thing I could find, a fireplace poker, and held it like a weapon. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. We crouched behind the couch, listening as the footsteps moved closer and closer, until they were right outside the kitchen window. The latch rattled, and I held my breath, praying that it would hold. Just then, headlights cut through the darkness, sweeping over the front yard. The footsteps stopped, and the knock on the door fell silent. The headlights illuminated the front porch, casting a stark glow on the door and revealing the silhouette of a figure standing there. I felt a rush of relief mixed with lingering dread. Help had arrived, but who was still outside? The footsteps had ceased, and for a moment, the night felt suspended, as if time itself had stopped. Is that him? Claire whispered, her breath barely audible. I shook my head slowly. I don't know. Stay low. We peered over the couch, watching as the figure moved closer, taking shape in the light. It was Martin, just as he had promised, but my heart still raced with anxiety. I had seen enough horror movies to know that the danger could still be lurking. He approached the door cautiously, flashlight in hand. Hey! Is everything okay? He called out, his voice steady but edged with concern. I could hear the unmistakable tremor of adrenaline behind his words. Martin! I shouted back, unable to keep the panic out of my voice. There's someone out here! I don't know who they are. Martin didn't hesitate. He stepped closer to the door, looking back at the darkened yard. You two stay inside. I'm coming in. I heard him fumble with the lock, and as the door swung open, I grabbed Claire's arm tightly. We held our breath, watching as he stepped into the house, his expression serious and alert. Did you see them? He asked, glancing back outside. I shook my head. They were just here. They said they were lost, something about a broken-down car, but it didn't sound right. I think it was a trick. Just then, we heard it again, the sound of footsteps, this time moving quickly around the back of the house. The noise sent chills down my spine. Martin stepped farther into the living room, his grip tightening around the flashlight. Call the police again, he ordered, his voice low and urgent. I'll check the perimeter. He moved toward the kitchen door, glancing back at us one last time, his eyes filled with an unspoken warning. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest as I dialed 911 again, my fingers shaking against the screen. 911, what's your emergency? Someone is trying to break into our house. I stammered, my voice rising in pitch. They were pretending to be lost, and now my neighbor is here, but they've vanished. Stay calm, the operator said, her tone steady. Officers are already on the way. Can you see them? Do you know where they went? No, I said, glancing toward the window, the rain now pouring harder outside, blurring the view. They were just here, walking around the house. We don't know where they are. I need you to stay inside and keep your doors locked, she instructed. The officers are just minutes away. Are you safe? Yes, I replied, but the word felt hollow. I didn't feel safe. Not with the knowledge that someone had been outside, trying to get in. Suddenly, I heard a loud thud from outside, followed by Martin's voice calling out, "Hey! Get away from there!" My heart raced, and Claire gasped beside me. I peered through the window again, but the rain had thickened, making it hard to see. The shadows outside seemed to flicker, as if something was moving just out of sight. "Martin!" I yelled, panic flooding my voice. "What's happening?" There was no immediate reply. Just silence, and then a sudden crash. The sound echoed through the night, a jarring reminder of the danger lurking just outside our walls. I stood frozen, my grip on the phone tightening as I waited for a response. Finally, I heard him shout again. "Call the police! Now! What do you see?" I asked, but he didn't answer. I grabbed Claire's hand, pulling her away from the window as a wave of urgency washed over me. "We need to get to the back room," I whispered. "Now." Together, we hurried through the dimly lit hallway, our footsteps barely making a sound on the wooden floor. I could hear the rain pounding against the roof, masking our movements, but I didn't dare to look back. I knew Martin was trying to protect us, but I couldn't shake the feeling of impending dread. Once we reached the back room, I shut the door behind us and locked it, the click of the lock sounding unnervingly loud in the stillness. We moved to the corner, crouching down behind an old bookshelf that had seen better days. "Do you think he'll be okay?" Claire whispered, her voice trembling. I wanted to reassure her, to tell her that everything would be fine, but the truth was, I didn't know. "He's strong. He knows what he's doing," I said, trying to sound confident. Just then, we heard the unmistakable sound of the front door slamming open, followed by the frantic footsteps of someone rushing inside. "Claire! Stay quiet!" I hissed, my heart racing as I held my breath, straining to hear what was happening. There was a scuffle, followed by Martin shouting, "Get away from her!" I felt Claire tense beside me, fear radiating off her in waves. "What if they come in here?" she said, her voice barely a whisper. "They won't," I promised, even though I wasn't sure. I wished I could see what was happening. The sounds from the living room were chaotic. Shouts, the sound of furniture being knocked over, and then a loud crash that sent my heart into my throat. I gripped the fireplace poker, my knuckles white as I prepared myself for whatever was to come. And then, it went silent. For what felt like an eternity, we sat there in the dark, listening for any hint of movement. My heart pounded in my chest, the silence heavy and suffocating. Finally, after what felt like hours, I heard the sound of footsteps approaching our door. My breath caught in my throat as I held the poker tightly, ready to defend us. The doorknob rattled, and a voice called out, "Claire? It's me, Martin!" Relief flooded through me, but I hesitated, still unsure. "Is it really you?" I asked, trying to keep the tremor out of my voice. "Yes," he shouted urgently. "Open the door! We have to get out of here!" I glanced at Claire, who looked equally uncertain. "Should we?" she whispered, her eyes wide. I took a deep breath, finally deciding. "Yes. We have to trust him." I rushed to unlock the door and swung it open. Martin stood there, disheveled but alive, his shirt torn and his face streaked with mud and rain. "We have to go. They're still out there. I heard them." "What do you mean?" Claire asked, panic rising in her voice. "There were 2 of them. No, 3. They tried to get in the back door while I was distracted. I think they're looking for something," he said, glancing over his shoulder nervously. "Did you call the police?" I asked, my heart racing at the thought of staying in the house any longer. "Yes, but I don't know how long they'll take. We need to get to the car and drive away before they find us." My mind raced as I processed what he said. But what about the windows? They could be anywhere. Martin nodded, his face grim. We have to move fast. Stay low, and don't make any noise. With that, we crept through the house, keeping to the shadows as we made our way back to the living room. The rain continued to pour outside, creating a thick curtain of noise that helped mask our movements. As we approached the front door, Martin raised a hand, signaling for us to stop. He peeked through the crack, and after a tense moment, he turned back to us. The coast is clear. Let's go. We moved as quickly and quietly as we could, slipping out into the rain-soaked night. The world outside felt different, as if the darkness itself was watching us. My heart pounded in my chest as we dashed to the car parked in the driveway, water soaking our clothes within seconds. Martin fumbled for his keys, his fingers shaking. Come on, he urged, his eyes darting around as if expecting the shadows to come alive. Finally, the car doors swung open, and we all climbed in, shivering from the cold and fear. Lock the doors, Martin commanded, and I hurriedly flipped the locks, my eyes scanning the darkness. As Martin started the engine, the headlights cut through the rain, illuminating the empty yard. We could see the outline of our house, a sanctuary that had turned into a trap. Drive, Claire said, her voice shaky. Get us out of here. Martin hit the gas, and we sped down the driveway, leaving the house behind. I glanced back through the rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone following us, but there was only darkness. The rain streamed down the glass, blurring everything outside into a wash of shadows. I can't believe that happened, Claire breathed, her voice trembling. What if they had gotten in? I don't know, I said, the fear still gripping my chest. But we need to go somewhere safe. Martin took us toward the nearest gas station, the bright lights shining like a beacon in the stormy night. As we drove, we recounted what had happened, the fear still palpable in the air. We finally reached the station, pulling up under the flickering lights. Martin turned off the engine, and we sat there for a moment, catching our breath. What do we do now? I asked. Wait for the police, Martin said, his voice steadying as he glanced around. And then we need to report everything. They'll need to know about the people outside. As we stepped out into the rain, the world felt different, strange and ominous. We were finally away from the house, but the memories of that night lingered in our minds. Hours later, after giving our statements to the police, we learned that there had been reports of similar incidents across the area. Someone was targeting homes, pretending to be lost in the night to gain entry. Claire and I returned home after the police had cleared the area, but the house no longer felt like our sanctuary. The doors were locked, the windows barred, and yet, every creak of the floorboards sent us into a panic. We installed security cameras around the property and kept the lights on at all times. Still, that night haunted us. Every sound felt amplified, and every shadow seemed to have a presence. It was the summer of 2018, and I was staying at my grandparents' farm in Nebraska. They had gone on a short trip to visit some old friends for a few days, and since I was on summer break, I volunteered to look after the place. It seemed like an easy gig: watch over the animals, feed them, make sure everything stayed in order. They offered me some cash for my trouble, and I thought, why not? It wasn't like I had anything else going on, and I loved the quiet out in the countryside. The first few days were peaceful. The farm was isolated, surrounded by acres of cornfields that stretched out as far as the eye could see. The animals were easy to care for, mostly cows, some chickens, and a couple of horses that grazed lazily in the heat. Each evening, I'd settle down in the living room, watch some TV, and drift off to sleep. But on the last night, things took a strange turn. It was a sticky, hot evening, the kind where even the wind feels thick and oppressive. I had just sat down in front of the TV with a cold beer, flipping through channels absent-mindedly. That's when I heard it, the faintest sound, like something rustling through the corn. At first, I didn't think much of it. Maybe a deer, I thought. It wasn't uncommon to hear animals moving through the fields at night. But then, the cows started bellowing. All of them. Together. If you've ever spent time on a farm, you know cows don't get spooked easily. They'll moo, they'll grumble. But this was different. The entire herd was in a panic, their cries loud and distressed. I felt a chill run down my spine. Something was wrong. I quickly grabbed a flashlight and my granddad's old hunting rifle, which he always kept by the door, just in case. Stepping outside, the air felt heavy, almost unnatural. I could hear the cows still in distress, their voices echoing across the darkened farm. I made my way to the barn, scanning the area with the flashlight. When I got to the barn, my heart sank. One of the cows, the one that had been tethered near the entrance, was missing. I know it was there earlier that evening, tied up just like the others. But now, there was nothing but an empty space, the rope hanging limp from the post. That's when I heard it, a low, guttural moo, but this time, it was coming from deeper into the cornfield. My gut twisted. Something, or someone, had taken the cow. I followed the sound, carefully stepping into the field. The corn stood taller than me, towering and thick, making it impossible to see more than a few feet ahead. The further I went, the more I started hearing something else. Voices. Soft, murmured voices, coming from the direction of the field. At first, I thought maybe I was imagining it. Maybe the wind was playing tricks on me. But then the voices became clearer. Human voices, whispering, chanting almost. I couldn't make out what they were saying, but it was eerie, like some kind of ritual or prayer. My palms started sweating. This wasn't just a lost cow. I raised the rifle and fired 2 shots into the air, hoping to scare off whoever or whatever was out there. The chanting stopped immediately. The night went dead silent, except for the faint rustle of the corn. I stood still, listening, waiting for something to happen. Then, just as suddenly as it had stopped, I heard footsteps, several of them, moving swiftly through the field, coming towards me. My pulse was pounding in my ears. The flashlight's beam shook as I swung it around, trying to pinpoint the source. But it was no use, the corn was too thick. I could hear them, though. They were close, too close. I turned and started walking back towards the barn, fast but steady, rifle gripped tightly in my hands. That's when I saw them. A group of figures, 6, maybe 7, dressed in black, their faces obscured by grotesque masks, standing in the rows of corn. My breath caught in my throat. They were just standing there, watching me. One of them stepped forward, hand outstretched, like they wanted me to lower the rifle. "Get the hell out of here!" I shouted, my voice breaking the tense silence. But they didn't move. Instead, they began chanting again, louder this time, their words an incomprehensible jumble of sounds that sent shivers down my spine. It was like they were speaking in tongues, some ancient, forgotten language. I fired another shot into the air, hoping to scare them off, but they didn't even flinch. If anything, they seemed more emboldened, their chanting growing more intense. My heart raced as I realized this wasn't just some prank. These people, whoever they were, weren't afraid. I couldn't take it anymore. Panic surged through me, and I bolted, running as fast as I could back towards the house. I could hear them behind me, their footsteps quick and deliberate, but I didn't dare look back. I fired off the rest of the shots blindly into the night, hoping to buy myself some time. When I finally made it back to the yard, I stopped, gasping for breath, and that's when I saw it, the missing cow's head. It was lying in the middle of the yard, its glassy eyes staring blankly up at the sky. But that wasn't the worst part. The head had been placed inside a circle of candles, arranged carefully like some kind of offering or ritual. My stomach churned, bile rising in my throat. This wasn't random. This was deliberate. I was dealing with something far darker than I had ever imagined. I stumbled back inside the house, locking every door and window. My hands were shaking as I grabbed my phone and dialed 911. The operator tried to calm me down, but my words were a frantic jumble. "There are people, they're out there, they killed one of the cows, there's a head, a circle." It didn't take long for the local sheriff to arrive. By the time they got there, the masked figures were gone, vanished into the corn. But the evidence was undeniable. The cow's head, the candles, the unsettling remnants of whatever ritual had taken place. They searched the field but found no one, just empty rows of corn swaying gently in the night breeze. The sheriff's deputies scoured the field with flashlights, but as I stood there, trembling in the doorway, I could see the disbelief in their faces. They didn't seem to know what to make of it either. The lead deputy, a burly man with a grizzled beard, knelt down beside the candle circle, examining the remnants of the grisly scene. "Son, can you tell us what exactly happened?" he asked, his voice low and steady, as if trying to coax a hidden truth out of me. I took a deep breath, the memory of the night flooding back like a cold wave. "I was watching TV, and I heard noises outside. The cows were going crazy, so I went to check. That's when I saw that one of them was missing, and then..." I hesitated, glancing back towards the field, half expecting to see those figures lurking just beyond the reach of the flashlight beams. Then I heard them chanting. I continued, my voice barely above a whisper. "A group of people in black with masks. They were doing something terrible. I shot at them to scare them off, and then I found the cow's head." The deputies exchanged uneasy glances, but the sheriff kept his focus on me. "We're going to look into this. We'll need you to give us a full statement back at the station. But first, let's make sure you're safe." They sent a couple of deputies to search the perimeter of the property, while the sheriff stayed close by. I could see the concern etched on his face, and it only fueled my anxiety. They didn't have to say it, but we all understood, this was no ordinary crime. As we walked to the squad car, I could feel the weight of the night's events pressing down on me. My mind raced with questions. Who were those people? What did they want? And why would they kill a cow in such a gruesome manner? It felt surreal, like something out of a horror movie, and I was just a terrified kid caught in the middle of it all. The sheriff drove me to the station, the cruiser's lights flashing softly in the darkness. I sat in the back seat, my thoughts swirling, trying to make sense of everything. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had stumbled upon something much bigger than I understood. Once at the station, I was ushered into an interrogation room. The sheriff motioned for me to sit at the table, while he took a seat across from me. He pulled out a notepad, ready to take notes. "Let's start from the beginning," he said. "Take your time and tell me everything you remember. The more detail, the better." As I recounted the events of the night, I felt a sense of urgency building in my chest. I had to convey the terror I experienced, the feeling of being hunted. I described the masked figures, their chants, the dark energy that surrounded them. I could see the sheriff scribbling down notes, his expression serious. "Have you ever seen anything like this before?" he asked after I finished my account. I shook my head. "No, never. I've been coming to this farm every summer since I was a kid, and I've never seen anything even close to this. It feels wrong." He nodded, deep in thought. "We've had some strange reports coming from this area lately, missing livestock, odd noises at night, but nothing like this. I'll need to have our forensics team take a look at the scene. Maybe we can find something that leads us to whoever did this." As the night wore on, the deputies returned from the farm with more unsettling news. They had found tracks leading away from the candle circle into the woods bordering the cornfield. It was a small break, but it felt like a glimmer of hope in an otherwise dark situation. But I didn't feel any relief. Instead, a deep-seated dread settled over me. I knew that whatever I had witnessed was far from over. Something was lurking out there, and it wasn't just a simple case of vandalism or animal cruelty. There was a darkness at play that I couldn't quite grasp. Eventually, after what felt like hours, the sheriff finished his notes and stood up. "I'll arrange for someone to take you home, and I'll have an officer keep watch at your grandparents' farm for the next few nights. It's not safe to be out there alone." When the officer arrived to take me home, I was still shaken. The farm felt like a different place now, a shadow of what it used to be. As we drove back, the headlights illuminated the road ahead, but my mind was still lost in the terror of what had happened. I kept thinking about those masked figures and the ritual they had performed. When we arrived, The scene was surreal. The sheriff's car was still parked outside, and I could see the faint glow of the candles still flickering in the yard. They hadn't taken the cow's head away yet. They wanted to preserve the evidence. I stepped into the house, feeling the weight of the silence. The officer went to check the perimeter while I wandered through the darkened rooms. Everything felt eerily quiet, the stillness amplifying my anxiety. I could hear the rustling of the corn outside, a reminder of the horrors that lay just beyond the windows. I tried to sleep that night, but every creak of the house made my heart race. I kept envisioning those masked figures emerging from the darkness, their chants echoing in my ears. Every noise felt amplified, every shadow seemed alive. Eventually, I drifted into a fitful sleep, plagued by nightmares of running through the cornfields, hunted by unseen entities. The next day, my parents arrived, concerned about my well-being after hearing what had happened. They embraced me tightly, but even their comfort couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had settled over me. They made sure I was okay before discussing the incident with the sheriff, who explained the situation and the measures they were taking. "Don't worry, we're going to get to the bottom of this," my father assured me. But I could see the worry etched in his brow. I knew they were just as unsettled by the events as I was. In the following days, the sheriff's department increased their patrols in the area. They even put out a call for anyone who had seen anything unusual, but no one came forward. It was as if the farm had fallen off the map, lost in a web of secrecy and fear. My grandparents returned a few days later, and when they heard what had happened, they were horrified. They immediately installed security cameras around the property, doing everything they could to feel safe again. They wanted to believe that whatever had happened was just an isolated incident, but deep down, we all knew it was something more. As time went on, the memory of that night lingered like a shadow over the farm. The rituals, the masked figures, the feeling of being watched, it all felt too real to ignore. I became hyper-aware of my surroundings whenever I was outside, as if something was always lurking just out of sight. Despite the cameras and increased security, a sense of dread settled over the farm. Even as I returned to help with chores and tried to reclaim my sense of normalcy, the memory of that night haunted me. The unease never truly faded, and the questions remained unanswered. Who were those figures? What were they doing in our cornfields? And more importantly, would they return? The answers felt elusive, cloaked in darkness, just like the figures that had terrified me that fateful night. My name is Ethan, and I'm 25 years old. While my parents took a much-needed vacation to the coast, I stayed behind to care for our family farm in rural Iowa. It was a sprawling property, the kind of place that felt both comforting and isolating. I had my two younger sisters, Lily and Savannah, to keep me company. Both were excited about the freedom of being home alone, but I sensed an undercurrent of unease that often crept into the quiet nights. One evening, after a long day of chores, we sat in the living room, the glow of the television illuminating our faces. We were laughing over some silly movie when suddenly, our two dogs, Max and Bella, burst into a frenzy of barking. Their growls echoed through the stillness, and I could tell that this was no ordinary bark. Something was wrong. "Ethan, what's going on with the dogs?" Lily asked, her voice trembling slightly. I stood up, the laughter dying in my throat. "I don't know, but it doesn't sound good. I'll check it out." As I opened the front door, the cool night air rushed in, wrapping around me like a thick blanket. The dogs dashed outside, their barks growing louder as they sprinted toward the cornfield that bordered our property. I followed them, my heart racing. The moon hung low in the sky, casting an eerie glow over the rows of corn, their leaves rustling like whispers in the night. Then I heard it, a soft, distinct whistling coming from the field. It was a melody I couldn't place, but it felt out of place in the quiet countryside. My instincts kicked in, and I felt a wave of anxiety wash over me. Who could be out there at this hour? "Guys, stay close!" I called to the dogs, though I knew they wouldn't listen. Their instincts took over, and they bounded ahead, barking madly as they approached the edge of the field. I hesitated, unsure if I should venture further. The darkness felt thick and suffocating, and a chill ran down my spine. I took a deep breath and ventured out into the yard, straining my ears to catch any other sounds. The whistling continued, persistent and haunting, almost playful. It felt like a taunt, and I could feel my stomach knotting with fear. I turned back to the house, the idea of grabbing my father's old hunting rifle creeping into my mind. After a moment of internal debate, I dashed inside, heart pounding. I told Lily and Savannah what was happening. They looked at me with wide eyes, uncertainty painted across their faces. "I think there's someone out there," I whispered, trying to keep my voice steady. "We should be careful." "What do you mean? Like a stranger?" Savannah asked, her voice shaky. "Yeah, it sounds like someone is in the cornfield," I replied, glancing back toward the door, half expecting to see someone emerge from the shadows. "I'm going to fire a warning shot." I quickly grabbed the rifle from its place in the living room and checked the chamber, feeling the reassuring weight in my hands. "Stay inside, and don't open the door for anyone," I instructed firmly, my heart racing as I stepped back outside. I took a deep breath, lifted the rifle, and fired a shot into the air. The loud crack echoed through the night, startling the dogs into momentary silence. But just as quickly as it had begun, the barking resumed, louder and more frantic than ever. It was as if they were warning me of something I couldn't see. "Ethan, are you sure this is a good idea?" Lily called from inside the house, her voice barely audible over the chaos. I nodded, though I wasn't sure myself. "I'll be fine. Just stay in and keep the door locked." Taking a few cautious steps toward the cornfield, I strained my eyes to pierce the darkness. The whistling had stopped, and a heavy silence enveloped the air. I felt a bead of sweat trickle down my forehead despite the chill. And then I saw him. Standing there, just 20 feet away, was a man in the field, blending in with the shadows cast by the moonlight. His figure was tall and lanky, and he was just standing there, staring directly at me. I froze, my heart hammering in my chest. The dogs were now barking furiously, darting around him in a wild frenzy, but he seemed unfazed. "Who are you?" I shouted, trying to sound braver than I felt. In response, he simply turned and took off deeper into the cornfield, disappearing into the maze of tall stalks. Panic surged through me. "Come back!" I yelled, but it was too late. I felt a rush of adrenaline and instinctively ran back to the house, ushering the dogs inside behind me. "Ethan, what happened?" Savannah asked, her eyes wide with fear as I locked the door behind me. "There was a man in the field. I think he's gone now, but we need to be careful," I replied, my voice steady but my insides churning. I called my dad for advice, my fingers trembling as I dialed his number. His voice was calm on the other end. "Ethan, listen. You need to protect your sisters. If he comes back, you do what you need to do to keep them safe. If you feel threatened, don't hesitate to shoot again." After hanging up, I glanced at my sisters, who were now holding onto each other, eyes filled with fear. I felt a rush of protectiveness wash over me. "We're going to be okay. I promise," I reassured them, though I wasn't entirely sure myself. As we settled into the living room, the weight of the night pressed down on us. Each creak of the house felt amplified, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. We retreated to our rooms after a few minutes, each of us taking a dog for comfort. I grabbed my rifle and brought it to my bedroom, placing it beside my bed, a cold comfort in the dark. The night dragged on, the silence in the house oppressive. I turned on my laptop to distract myself with a movie, but my focus was shattered by the distant sounds of the dogs outside. They were restless, pacing back and forth, sensing the tension in the air. I glanced out the window, the moonlight casting eerie shadows across the yard. That's when I heard it again, a faint whistling, soft and melodic, cutting through the silence like a knife. My heart sank as I recognized it. It was coming from the yard, and I peered outside, dread pooling in my stomach. There he was again, the same man, now wandering across the yard, a slow, deliberate movement. He was looking right at me, his gaze piercing through the darkness. My heart raced as I froze in place, the whistling growing louder as he stepped closer, seemingly unfazed by my presence. Realizing he was toying with me, I quickly grabbed my rifle and aimed it toward the ground in front of him, firing a shot that ricocheted through the night. The shot rang out, sending a clear message, but to my shock, he didn't flee this time. Instead, he paused, looking at me with an unsettling calmness before taking a step back. I felt a surge of anger and fear. "Get off my property!" I shouted, my voice steady. He didn't respond, but I could see the challenge in his eyes, as if he were daring me to come out after him. He turned and sprinted toward the trees at the edge of our property, vanishing into the night. The dogs stopped barking, their bodies tense with adrenaline. I slammed the window shut, my heart racing as I glanced back at my sisters, who were huddled in the corner, fear written across their faces. "It's okay," I said, trying to reassure myself as much as them. "He's gone. He won't come back." But deep down, I knew that wasn't the end. I could still hear that haunting whistling echoing in my mind, an ominous reminder of the night that was far from over. The night wore on slowly, the tension in the air palpable as we tried to settle down. Lily and Savannah had retreated to their rooms, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't safe. I paced the living room, rifle in hand, listening for any sound that might signal the return of the stranger. Hours seemed to drag on, and eventually, I heard the quiet stirrings of dawn. The sun would soon rise, bringing with it a sense of normalcy. Yet the image of the man haunted me, his presence lurking like a ghost in my mind. I finally decided to get some rest, collapsing onto my bed, exhaustion overtaking me despite the fear. Sleep came in fits and starts, plagued by nightmares of the man lurking just outside our windows, whistling that same taunting melody. I woke up with a start as the morning light streamed into my room, casting bright shadows across the floor. I glanced at the clock, mid-morning. "Ethan! Come quick!" I heard Savannah's voice shrill and urgent from downstairs. My heart leaped into my throat as I dashed out of bed and rushed down the stairs. "What is it?" I asked, breathless. Lily stood in front of the living room window, pointing outside. "Look," she said, her face pale. I stepped beside her and gasped. There, in the yard, stood a scarecrow that hadn't been there before. It was made hastily, with old clothes stuffed with hay, but what caught my attention were the eyes. Two dark buttons that seemed to stare right back at us. At its feet lay a collection of twigs and corn husks arranged in a crude pattern. A shiver ran down my spine. "What the hell is that?" I muttered, my eyes fixed on the scarecrow. Savannah trembled beside me. "It wasn't there before, was it?" "No, it definitely wasn't," I replied, feeling the blood drain from my face. "Who put that there?" "We should call Dad," Lily suggested, but I could sense that she was afraid of what might happen if we did. I didn't want to alert him to the danger and worry him unnecessarily. But I also knew we couldn't stay here without figuring out what was happening. "Let's go outside and check it out," I said, my voice steely with determination. I couldn't let fear control us. "Stay close, and if anything feels off, we go straight back inside, understood?" Lily and Savannah nodded, their expressions serious as we stepped onto the porch. The morning air was crisp, and the world seemed deceptively peaceful. I grabbed my rifle, holding it tightly as we approached the scarecrow. As we got closer, I realized that the scarecrow wasn't just creepy, it was a message. A half-eaten apple hung from the outstretched arm, and a strange symbol was painted on the shirt, a circle with 3 jagged lines crossing through it. It looked vaguely familiar, but I couldn't place it. "What does it mean?" Savannah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know," I replied, my heart racing. "But I don't like it." Suddenly, Max and Bella, who had been sniffing around the scarecrow, began barking furiously, their hackles raised. I felt my stomach drop as I turned to see a figure emerge from the tree line at the edge of our property. It was him, the same man from last night, now standing there with an unsettling grin plastered across his face. "Get inside!" I shouted at my sisters, shoving them back toward the house as I aimed my rifle at the figure. He didn't move closer. Instead, he just stood there, whistling that same haunting melody, as if mocking me. "Who are you?" I yelled, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "What do you want?" He tilted his head, still whistling, his expression unreadable. The dogs lunged at him, barking wildly, but he didn't flinch. "Ethan," he called out, his voice smooth and eerily calm. "I just wanted to play." "Play? What kind of sick game is this?" I shot back, fury rising within me. "Not a game," he replied, stepping closer, his demeanor shifting. "It's a challenge. One you've already begun." I felt a cold sweat break out on my brow as I glanced back at the scarecrow, then back at him. "What do you want from us?" I demanded, keeping my aim steady. "Just a little fun, Ethan. You think you can protect them?" He gestured dismissively toward the house. "Maybe you should look closer at your little sisters. They're the ones who need protecting from you." His words sent a jolt of panic through me. "Stay away from them," I shouted, but he only laughed, a chilling sound that echoed through the morning air. In that moment, something shifted inside me. I couldn't let this man intimidate us. I needed to act. "Get away from here, or I swear I'll shoot," I yelled, my finger hovering over the trigger. The man just smiled wider, a glint of amusement in his eyes. "You think it's that simple? You don't understand what you're dealing with." With that, he turned and sprinted back into the woods, disappearing from view. I felt a wave of confusion wash over me. What had just happened? What did he mean by the challenge? And how was I supposed to protect my sisters from something I didn't understand? I rushed back inside, locking the door behind me. My heart was pounding as I turned to Lily and Savannah, who looked terrified. "What just happened?" Lily gasped, her eyes wide. "I don't know," I admitted, running a hand through my hair. "But we can't stay here. We need to leave, right now." "Leave? Where will we go?" Savannah asked, panic rising in her voice. "Anywhere but here. We'll go to the neighbor's house and call the police," I said, urgency driving my words. "We can't risk him coming back." We quickly packed a few essentials, a couple of clothes, my rifle, and some food. I checked the windows and doors, ensuring everything was locked tight. The tension in the air felt suffocating, and every sound made me jump. As we made our way outside, I glanced back at the scarecrow, still standing ominously in the yard. The dogs were quiet now, sensing the change in mood. I ushered my sisters ahead of me, keeping my rifle raised, ready for anything. We headed down the dirt road that led to our neighbor's house, my heart pounding in my chest. Every rustle of the leaves felt like a warning, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. It was as if the very air around us was charged with unease. Finally, we reached the neighbor's house, knocking frantically on the door. When Mr. Harris, an older man with a kind face, opened the door, relief flooded through me. "Ethan? What's wrong?" he asked, concern etched in his features. "There's someone out there, and I think he's after us. We need to call the police," I said, my voice urgent. He ushered us inside, and we quickly explained the situation. Mr. Harris's expression grew serious as he listened. "You should never have stayed out there alone," he warned. "This area has had its share of strange happenings lately. People disappearing, strange noises at night." My stomach dropped at his words, but I couldn't let fear consume me. We needed to stay strong. After a brief phone call to the police, we settled in Mr. Harris's living room, waiting for help to arrive. Hours passed, and with each tick of the clock, my anxiety grew. I kept replaying the events in my mind, the man's words echoing ominously. What challenge had he been referring to? And why had he chosen us? As night fell, I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't safe. I peered out the window, scanning the darkness, expecting to see that unsettling figure emerge from the shadows. I could feel my heart racing in my chest, an incessant drumbeat of dread. Suddenly, a loud banging echoed from the front door, causing us all to jump. "What was that?" Lily whispered, her voice trembling. "Stay here," I ordered, gripping the rifle tightly. I moved cautiously toward the door, my senses heightened. Mr. Harris opened it slowly, revealing 2 police officers standing there, flashlights illuminating the yard. "Ethan, is everything all right?" one officer asked, scanning the area. "I don't know," I replied, my voice shaky. "There was a man, he was whistling, and he put that scarecrow in our yard. I'm afraid he's coming for us." The officers exchanged glances, a mixture of skepticism and concern on their faces. "We'll check it out," one said, stepping outside with his partner, leaving us in anxious silence. Minutes felt like hours as we waited, hearts pounding in unison. I glanced at my sisters, who looked terrified, and I felt a rush of determination surge through me. I couldn't let this man win. I had to protect them, no matter what. Finally, the officers returned, their expressions grim. "There's nothing out there," one said, clearly trying to calm us. "It's probably just kids playing pranks. We'll patrol the area tonight, but you all should try to get some rest." I felt a mix of relief and frustration. "But what about the scarecrow?" I asked, my voice rising. "That's not a prank. We'll have someone take it down in the morning," the other officer assured me. "You all are safe here. We'll make sure of it." As the night dragged on, I struggled to find sleep. The fear of the unknown loomed heavy over me, like a dark cloud that wouldn't dissipate. I felt the weight of responsibility for my sisters pressing down on me, and I refused to let it crush me. Eventually, exhaustion took over, and I succumbed to sleep. But it was a restless slumber filled with dreams of whistling echoes and dark figures. I awoke with a start, heart racing, the sun barely peeking through the curtains. The next day, we returned to our house, though every step felt heavy with unease. I knew that whatever had happened wasn't over. The mystery of the man and the scarecrow lingered in the air, a specter we couldn't escape. As we walked through the door, I glanced back at the cornfield, half expecting to see him standing there, watching. But all that met my gaze was silence, an eerie calm settling over the land. I could only hope that our encounter with the unknown was finally behind us, though deep down, I knew that some mysteries were never truly solved.